All right, welcome for another week of Found in Interpretation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Brian. Brian, how you doing
Hello.
this week?
I'm doing all right. I'm here and home in Guelph, but it looks like you're out of town.
Yeah, actually, I'm in Calgary right now. You can see behind me the beautiful mountains. No, actually, it's a curtain, but I'm staying actually at the Vermont Palliser in Calgary. It was a bit chilly this morning, 0 degrees. You feel the air of the mountains. And I came here to work and maybe enjoy myself a little bit with a pretty good Albertan steak, which I had last
Ah,
night.
very nice. Yeah, it was very crisp this morning here too, but no mountains. So
Oh, the Guelph Mountains.
the Guelph Mountains, yes. The escarpment is the closest thing we've got, but nowhere near what we're how beautiful it is over there. I love going to Calgary.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And I wish I had a tiny bit more time to go up the Calgary Tower to have a view. I've
yeah.
never, have you been?
Yes, they call it the CN Tower, even though there's one here in Toronto. But in any event, it's not as tall, but it's
Oh,
quite
it's quite
impressive,
short.
anyways.
It's quite
Yeah,
short, actually.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah,
Anyways, yes,
yes. Okay, so
welcome.
we'll be starting on this week's topic.
Yes, yes, welcome everybody to our podcast. And like Alain said, my name is Brian Bickford, and I guess I'm gonna maybe start off with by mentioning what we're gonna talk about, other than the beautiful mountains of Calgary of Alberta. We're gonna be talking about the human brain and how it works in terms of interpretation, and how we are multitasking machines, basically.
Yes, we are. How many? So, let's be honest here. When you're interpreting, does it happen sometimes that you do other things? Let's say
Yes.
that you would check your emails or write a reply to a message or something.
Yes, I mean we're constantly doing other things when we're interpreting. We're checking with our colleagues, especially online. We go on WhatsApp to just go back and forth and see like whose turn it is, whatnot, and yeah, and like I own a business, so I do have to keep on in touch with my clients and all that. So yeah, we do other things other than interpret. Obviously, the most that takes a lot of practice and skill to be able to do those kinds of things. But at first, if you're a newcomer, I would suggest focus on interpretation, and later on, yeah, do if you're able to multitask without sacrificing the quality, then by all means. But the interesting thing about the human brain is that it's a very unique human ability. It's not everyone who could do it. You've seen well now like you can't even text and drive because you can't do two things at once. So
Yeah, I mean,
imagine being
it's like being impaired, right?
yes, absolutely. Like yeah, it's to say it's the equivalent, right? So the cool thing about interpreters' brains is that we are able to use different functions in our brain to be able to do what we do. Now, I'm not
Is that what
suggesting
you'd like to
that we.
explain today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being in favor of texting and driving by any means. So I hope that this didn't throw you off. But yeah, no, for sure. Like when it comes to the human brain, we can do different things, and yeah, we'll explain kind of like what it's like. We'll delve a bit deeper into the human brain activity, and then I think you and I, when we discussed last, we kind of had a loose discussion as to how we're going to do this. Today, we're going to talk a bit about the human brain, and then next time we'll see how we can bring AI into the mix.
All right. And actually, I read that a long time ago, people did not believe that human beings could do simultaneous interpretation.
That's
People
right.
were
Yeah.
doing consecutive interpretation, right?
Yes.
And for those who don't know, I mean, interpreters, all interpreters listening to this podcast will know. But if you're not an interpreter and you're wondering what the difference is between consecutive and simultaneous interpretation, basically, consecutive is as an interpreter, you would be listening to something, you'll be memorizing or writing notes, and then after that, you'll be translating into your target language. But when it comes to simultaneous interpretation, you're doing both things at the same time. You're listening, you're thinking, you're summarizing or playing a little bit with it, and then you have to speak in the target language. And until technology came about, people did not believe that this ability was humanly possible, right?
That's right. Yeah. So when during World War One, and then more so in World War Two, the technology was developed so that people can speak into microphones and transmit a signal to people who were needed to listen into another language. It was all like a bunch of wires, and like for example, in the Nuremberg trials, interpreters were doing their work with a headphone, and they were listening to what was happening and repeating it into a microphone. And then there was a console that was hooked up to a bunch of wires, and everybody who needed it could put on a set of headphones that was connected to that and listen to the interpretation. So it's not as clean as what you would see today, for example, in the United Nations, where people have these wireless headsets that they could put on. So back then, that was basically the technology, but it was a stepping stone to be able to start it interpretation as simultaneous interpretation.
If I'm not mistaken, I think this is officially the like, I would call even the birth of of our current profession, right, or the modern version of our profession.
Yes, and actually during the Nuremberg trials, when people had to go to trial to say what they did during the war, a lot of people didn't believe what was coming out of the interpreters' mouths. They're like, "That's impossible that this person would say that they did such atrocities to this other person," and the judge would ask, "Can you please repeat that?" And then they repeated it, and it was the same message, and they had to do it multiple times to make sure that actually what the interpreter was saying was accurate, because they just couldn't believe what they were listening to.
Are you aware if that was only on the German side or also on the Japanese side?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the extent of I didn't read enough about the Nuremberg trials to be able to
We'll ask
comment
the fact
more on that.
checkers. We're
Yeah,
starting to have a few views now, so I want those fact checkers to check that and put a comment below.
we're gonna have to go back to all of since day one and say fact check this, fact check this. We'll do like a whole episode on fact checking. So
Right.
that'll keep us busy. And but yeah, so basically the reason why they were astonished as to why the human brain could do this is because you're multiplying the amount of functions that you're doing in your brain. You're not just listening to a message, you're actually like trying to capture it, like you said, and deliver the message as um, faithfully as possible into another language. So you're using your sensory skills, you're using your motor skills, you're using your cognitive functions like the ability to decipher, and even like almost your ability to forecast what's going to be said next. So it's almost like it.
Well, okay. Well, all of that, to many people, I think it may seem like magic. Like some people sometimes come to me and say, I don't know how you do this. It's really incredible. How can you listen in one language and then speak into another? For a lot of people, it may seem magical. For us, it's quite natural. That's what we do on a daily basis. But do you think this is a natural skill, or do you think this is something you can learn?
Um, I was able to fortunately do this as something that came naturally to me. I'm not sure if that's the case for everybody, but it is something that you learn to do at first. And then once you think, okay, I can do it, then it takes a lot of practice to actually be good and proficient at it. My suggestion for anybody who is interested is to just put on the news today and listen to the news in English and see if you can just repeat what the newscaster is saying in English. Like
Oh, you
you'll
mean
have
like parroting?
yeah, yeah. Be a parrot for, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. See if you can do it. If you can, then maybe you can. If you're bilingual, you can try it out for and see if you can interpret what they're saying.
What you're saying is very interesting because when was doing my master's, I wanted to learn how to speak more quickly and speed things up. So I was doing a lot of shadowing exercise, either in French or in English. So, for instance, I was subscribing to The Economist or Le Monde Diplomatique in French. And they would have they would read articles, and then I would repeat aloud the articles right after them in
Hmm.
order to just practice, from my own native language, into like you're just basically repeating one, not even one language to another, just in the same language, and just to in order to be able to speed things up and learn, like to develop your kind of mouth muscle memory
Hmm.
in order to get faster. So that is also something that I did a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and you get quicker and quicker and better and better. But like I said, it's a good thing to even try it. And one of the first things that I was suggested when I started was to go on the government channel, like CPAP or something like that, and you listen to um, the parliamentary proceedings. And those you can record them, and then you can record yourself, or nowadays they're available online. When there was no such thing when I first started, but so that they're available online, and then they would give you they would publish later on that evening the transcript in the language that was spoken, as well as the translation for that. So that was a great way to be able to record yourself and go back and say, oh, where did I mess up, or where did I get, what did I do right, and what terms did they use. Like, that was a really cool way to be able to practice without being on site, because that's the other good thing about interpretation, is like the more you're exposed, the better you are, right?
Of course, like anything, you want to get better at something, you got to practice, practice, practice.
That's right. Yeah.
But it always
So
depends how you practice, right?
yeah, it does. It depends how you practice. It depends how you slept the night before. It depends on a whole bunch of different factors. Yeah.
So, and what about, let's talk a bit more deeply of what is going on in the brain. While we're doing this, people see what we can do, but what happens inside inside our head?
Well, an article I read talks a lot about what's called the caudate nucleus, and I was like, "What the heck is a caudate nucleus?" So I looked it up, and it's basically the part of the brain that's kind of in the middle of the brain, and it's responsible for processing visual information as well as movement as well as memory. So that's a really vital part of your brain, and what's really I read further into is, and it said that if it stops working properly, so dysfunction, it could cause conditions like dementia or Parkinson's disease. So, like you said, it's the more you use it, the better, right? Like, so the more you interpret, the better it is. So I read that being bilingual and using that visual information, movement, and memory inside the caudate nucleus is a good way to prevent or to counter dementia or Parkinson's disease.
I have a question actually, and I got a little confession to make when you're saying this. Ever since I've been doing this for a number of years now, and I feel that I got to memorize so much terminology, and I have to memorize all sorts of things, and I have to read a lot for conferences and anything that more often than not now, I don't remember where I put my keys. No, really. I now I have this little Apple AirTag. In order to find my keys, I can't find my keys. Or like it's as if my brain says, "Well, I know this is important for your work and everything, and you got to remember that." So when it comes to terminology, I remember everything. I see a word once, maybe twice, and I'll remember it forever when it's for work. But I
Mhm.
can't find my keys.
I know, it's strange. It
I
happens to me with different things too. My sometimes when my wife tells me something, I'm like, I forgot what you just asked me to get. That was on the grocery list, like, so that you're right. Like, it's weird how those different parts of your brain work. But I think that um, what was very useful in terms of like doing the master's program, and some of the tips that my colleagues have given me throughout the years, is you remember things more when you write them down. So,
Yes.
well, the cool thing about having a booth mate and working in teams of two or three is that you can write next to them. Like, you should always have a notepad, and then you can write terms that come up often. So, like, instead of having to remember where your keys are, what this term is, it's right there. So you don't have to go searching for it.
Do you still use a pencil?
Yeah, at home I do.
Oh, you know what? That was one of my challenges when I was basically when I have to do consecutive interpretation and
Yeah.
I have to use a pad and a pencil. Um, I'm glad I'm doing symbols because just writing letters, the alphabet, and anything. I find it incredibly challenging because now we only use keyboards.
Yeah.
And another confession number two. I'm losing this finger muscle memory to write well. So yeah, kudos to you for keeping it up.
Well, in my defense, though, I've never been able to really understand my handwriting, and neither have people who have read my handwriting. So, so
Are you left-handed or right-handed?
I am left-handed,
Me
unfortunately. So
too.
that's, yeah, that's what
I didn't know you're
I didn't know.
left-handed.
Yeah, we both are.
Oh, that's why.
There. So the mystery solved. You don't need to be left-handed to be an interpreter, though.
Right, right, right. This is
Yeah.
coincidence.
Yes, this is absolute coincidence. But we do have crappy writing. That is not a coincidence.
So,
Um,
what kind of tips would you give to help interpreters with their memory and remember terminology? You mentioned writing things on a pad. In my case, I have a very good photogenic memory. Whenever always seem to have this kind of a third eye. When I see a word, for instance, I search on Termium, and I see a word, and while I'm interpreting, I sort of have flashes of words appearing in my head, and I get to see them as I interpret. Is it the same
that's
thing
what
for
I
you?
Yeah, but for me again, it's with the writing of it. Like if when I write it, I remember what I wrote. So that to me
Wow.
is the thing that I use a lot. It's a kind of a crutch, and it works really well with numbers. So if someone's just spewing a bunch of numbers because they're talking about a graph or they're talking about a table or something like that, then like it's really like I don't even look at what they're pointing at. I'm just writing down the numbers because that's the important message, right? So then I can see the numbers, and then I'm like, oh, okay, this number is 5343. So then I can just repeat that because it's already in front of me, right? As opposed to
Yeah.
trying to translate while you're listening to it and be like, oh, is it like 1,000? Is it a million? Is it? So yeah, so I do that for numbers, and I find that really useful. But like you said, like with a photographic memory, if you write it down too, you're even during a conference while you're doing it, you'll remember where you wrote it down. So like going back to it, it's a lot easier than like, oh my God, I saved it on this Excel sheet where I have this glossary and then I got to go look it up and then like do a find of per alphabetical order. Like
Yeah.
it's just a
Every
lot more.
interpreter. Yeah, every interpreter is different. A lot of interpreters tell me, oh, like they're asking me, where do you keep your glossary? And I always say in my head. I in another confession number three. I don't really have a glossary. I may have a DeepL window open when I'm
Mhm.
interpreting. If there's a little slip or something, or just want to make sure about something, I type it down. But I never, like when I started interpretation, I never prepared with more than, let's say, 10 to 15 terms. And now with experience, maybe one or two,
Yeah.
because, we've been doing this a lot for a number of years. But I I kind of remember everything. How is it for you? How do you
Yeah.
memorize? Do you keep a terminology glossary and Excel sheets and all of that?
Well, I think after doing it for 21 years, I do have a fairly good grasp of very particular industries that I work in often. So then it kind of comes as second nature every time a term comes up. But when it's something new, it's important to get the documentation ahead of time and to go
Oh, of
through it.
course.
And then I create my glossaries before the conference, and it's easy to do. You can uh, cheat a bit with ChatGPT and DeepL. We have a lot of other like online AI tools that we can use, and we'll go more in depth with that next podcast. But because we're kind of off track a bit, but but
Always, always.
always, yeah. I don't think we've ever been on track.
Hey, we're just making shorts right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Nobody listens to the whole thing. We're just making
No,
shorts.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so like yeah, like nowadays it's great to be able to do all those things ahead of time and to have all those tools. I'm just thinking like back in World War II, like what were people doing? Like did they have to bring their dictionaries with them like wherever they went and have like, give me a minute, I'm gonna look up this term and I'll be right back. Like
Well, do you remember
I
Saving
wonder.
Private Ryan?
Yeah, yeah.
There's an interpreter there that accompanies, the soldiers, right?
Hmm.
He was bringing a giant typewriter or something in the beginning, and then he left it off. But he was
Yeah.
ready to bring his giant typewriter.
Oh yeah, and like even in ancient China, they always had to rely on interpreters, even just because the region was so vast. Like they had to, there was different dialects no matter wherever you went within the empire. So like you had to bring interpreters with you all the time. So yeah, interpreters have been around for like ever. But the cool thing was with the introduction of this technology was to be able to do it in real time, and that's what we do. That's what we specialize in.
Yeah. How do you deal though with some fatigue that comes with doing these two things at the same time? How do you rest after a long day of interpretation?
Well, this is the thing about the turns, right? Like we've been talking about how interpreters take turns. They take like 30 minutes each, maybe as an interval. If it's a really complicated conference, then maybe 20 minutes. But generally speaking, like we're pretty well versed in, legal conferences and unions and you name it. We've done a lot of stuff in the last few years, right? So for us, it's not as demanding, but for someone who's a newcomer, someone who like it's their first time, even if they've been interpreting in the courts for years, but then all of a sudden they're in a medical conference, it's going to be exhausting by the end of the day. But the cool thing is that we do have some norms in place so that we can have these breaks and so that the quality of the interpretation doesn't decrease because it's a muscle. Like the brain is a muscle and you need to give it breaks. It's not a marathon, right? You don't want to end up with someone who's absolutely brain dead by the afternoon and can't continue interpreting. Like you need to have these natural breaks throughout the day so that you can rest up and get ready and recharge and go at it again.
That's why sleep is essential.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
a
And
good
and
night's
I
sleep is
always
essential.
yeah, how's the time change going there? Even if it's only
Oh,
2 hours.
I woke up actually this morning at 5 in the morning because I
Yeah,
usually wake up at 7. And then my eyes were wide open. And well, I've been up for more than 12 hours now
yeah.
after a
That's what
long
I
day of
find.
interpretation.
I know, and that's what I find after, like, say, if I go to Vancouver and I wake up at 6 a.m. Vancouver time, I'm like, oh, I slept in. It's like noon back home, right? Or, or 9 back home. So, like, I'll go for a walk around Stanley Park before I even start my work day. So yeah, it's a challenge, even just that, just to be able to get over jet lag or get over, um, like the flight is long, like you're in a hotel room, you're in a different bed. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges when you're traveling for work.
Oh, totally, totally. And you have to endure hotel food.
hmm Yes, and I always put on some weight when I go to hotels because it's all sandwiches and like a lot of like a carb load
Well,
up, right?
we
So
had three kinds of pasta today.
there you go.
Yeah, it was all right. I mean, I didn't eat too much. I'm be careful a bit, with the pasta, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And last night was the steak. Today's the pasta. I'm gonna gain a few kilos once I get home.
Oh, I know. But yeah, no, but I think some of the things that really tire us out too is not having the necessary preparation, like the documentation that people are supposed to supply us. A lot of times it doesn't come, so then you're using your brain a lot more to try to keep up with what's happening, and also the speed of at which people speak. Like a lot of people aren't aware that they're being interpreted, so they're not going to change the pace
Or don't
of
care.
their speech or don't care. Yeah, that's or you tell them. A lot of people say, "Oh, well, you got to tell them to slow down," but you know what? Like after 30 seconds, they're right back at the same
Yeah.
speed, so that doesn't really help as much.
You
So,
know, I found I got in my case, I sort of have this little chart in my head, which is if I know the topic and the speaker doesn't express himself well,
mhm,
at least I know the topic, so I understand completely, and I know the topic, so I can explain it well.
yeah,
If I know the topic and they speak well, I can do an amazing job. Then this is a stellar performance. It's great. It's fun. I'm having fun, and it's a great presentation. And then comes the other part. Um, I don't know much about it or anything, only what I read.
mhm,
And the person is not expressing themselves so well, or they're rushing through because they got to explain their PhD in 15 minutes to the mining industry.
Yeah,
Um, I have to admit, that's when I did crash and burn.
yeah, yeah. No, there's sometimes where
So,
you're like, oh, it's just too much. Like I've had PhD students trying to defend their thesis in a certain amount of time, and they've written hundreds of pages for their thesis, but they have 15 minutes to do it.
yeah.
But yeah,
So the lesson here is beyond words, beyond all of that. I think that it's very important to keep in mind that having general knowledge and always reading and always being aware of what's going on. Honestly, confession number four: I'm not a big fan of sports. And I don't, like everyone during the Stanley Cup, I may watch hockey, but nothing more than that. I don't know much about football or baseball or anything, but I do follow it just to make sure that I know what people are talking about. I try to be interested even in the things that I'm not interested in order to make sure that I know enough about what is going on everywhere, to make sure that if I'm ever in a topic that I'm not familiar with, at least I'll be familiar with it enough. And I
hmm
think that general knowledge is something that is underestimated, but is actually at the core of what we do. If you have general knowledge and you have the skills, you can be a great interpreter, but you may have all the skills of an interpreter, but if you don't have that general knowledge, I don't think you'll be doing a good job.
no, absolutely. Like being not just well versed in your own country, but even in other countries. Like if you enjoy travel, if you enjoy cooking, if you enjoy international cuisine, like if you like all these different things, then like that, yeah, in a way, it does make you a better interpreter with all the training that you've had leading up to it. And you're right, like you do have to keep up to date with all of the current information. Like for example, today I was in a doing a financial event on Zoom, and yeah, I had the presentation deck all lined up and everything. We're talking about equity, we're talking about long-term performance and stocks and all this stuff, and I was prepared for that. And all of a sudden, whoop, loophole! We're talking about the U.S. elections now and how that's going to impact the
Uh,
economy. So like they're talking about
it
how tight
won't. Of course, it won't.
it never has. No, in 84 years, it's
No.
never done it. But well, they were talking about how tight the race was between Trump and Harris, right? So and what would happen if Trump wins an election? What would happen if Harris wins an election? And yeah, so they and why? What are the key points that would help them on each side win their respective voters' confidence, right? So yeah, if you're talking about financial terms, all of a sudden you're pivoting into this, you better be up to date with what's happening in the U.S. elections right now to know that it's a tight race and that things could derail at any second for either one of the candidates.
That's absolutely true. In anyway, in our work, I think I hear a lot about the U.S. election. I think I hear more about the U.S. election than than anything in Canada. I mean, we're so close to the United States that I think that people actually care more about what is going on south of the border than their own country.
Yes, a lot of times that happens. Yeah, there's a lot of conferences, even it's closer to the elections usually. Yeah. So it's every 4 years we get this cycle of Canadians talking more and more about what's happening south of the border. I mean, when Trump got elected, remember the Immigration Canada website crashed because there's so many Americans trying to
Really,
get.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah, yeah. So that's what happened last time. So yeah, it was
Wow.
the our websites are all safe once Biden got elected, but we'll see what happens in less than a month.
Yeah. No, what, 2 or 3 weeks now? Wow. Okay, this is
Yeah,
getting closer.
yeah.
So yeah, no,
So
it's not. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah,
Oh no, I was just saying that it's it's absolutely important to be aware of everything that is going on. I mean, I remember, and I remember once, like when I was doing the masters, at some point we were talking, about the British royal family, and I remember one of the students was like, "Who cares about the royal family?" And I don't care about these things. These are just superficial people, And I was like, no, I mean, I don't care about the royal family, but you have to care,
yeah,
because that's why we have a governor general in Canada. you
Yeah.
know, and if you want to understand the political system that we do have, then you have to understand what the royal family's for. I mean, even if you might not care about their lives and all this gossiping, it's still
Yeah.
important, right?
Yeah, it's important to differentiate between caring about the people and caring about the topic, right? So
That
like
that's a very good point.
yeah, so that you may not care too much about like what your beliefs are about certain people who are in power, but you do have to follow what they're doing and like be aware of of the topic, because when it comes down to it, yeah, like you said, we could one day have the governor general at one of our conferences, and then what do you do,
Yeah.
right? Like, so that's happened
Have
to
you
me a couple
ever
of times.
have you ever actually seen an interpreter live that changed the content, suspectedly maybe to adjust to their own political beliefs?
Uh, yes, actually, a couple of times.
Me too.
Um, yeah, and I don't. I think it's important when you're an interpreter to accept things that you know are going to be things that that you don't feel uncomfortable with, because it's basically called a conflict of interest. If you are a staunch religious, if you practice a religion and you're a staunch believer in that religion, and then all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, because this conference, it was outlined beforehand. It was about the LGBTQ community and their religion. That's just something that's frowned upon. So when they're talking about that community and some of the things that they do and whatnot, then this person was just they just stopped interpreting, and I don't.
No, they stopped
Yeah,
interpreting.
yeah, and that's not something that's something that would be frowned upon. Like you
Wow,
are
that's quite
not.
unprofessional. Was it an
Yes.
experienced interpreter?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But there
So
are
how did you deal
certain
with that?
they could not. Well, not to wash myself clean of this, but this was not my contract. But I heard it from another interpreter, and he was just like looking at him, and he was refusing to interpret. So he just took over, fortunately, and continued the interpretation. So because bottom line, what you're doing is you're trying to help the people who don't speak the language understand what's happening, and this
Yeah.
person just like frozen, right? So that's not helping anybody. So yeah, it was a very delicate topic, but I told him, like, like he knew ahead of time what the topic was. Like, what's the problem? Like, and even the conference was in Niagara Falls, and also part of his beliefs is that he doesn't believe in gambling. So the in order to go from the conference center to the hotel that they were staying at, the shortcut was to go through the casino, and so all of the interpreters were going into the casino to take the shortcut. It was cold; you don't want to go around, like things happen in Canada, like snow and ice, and this guy's like, no, I'm going the long way. So yeah, that was it.
Wow.
So that
That
was
I heard of a few things, but I'd never heard something so extreme.
yeah, that was the most extreme case that I've heard of. Like, there's some people
Wow.
who are like, on the fence about if someone swears, do you swear as well as an interpreter?
Well,
Like,
when I was doing my master's, I remember one of my Helen Campbell told me that to you know turn down the volume by a couple of notches. Let's say let's say someone is angry, you can express anger without imitating the anger that they have in their own voice.
hmm
So, for instance, if somebody is shouting, then I'll be shouting. You know,
hmm
yeah, you kind of show strength in your voice without going above and beyond like someone has. I remember I was doing a union, and these union guys, they're all having a meeting. It's a private meeting, and they're swearing, and they're like this. And then I was wondering, like, I have to go from English to French or French to English, and sometimes one guy was like, "Mac, the call," and then I was like, "Am I gonna say all of these words in English? I mean, they're not translatable, obviously, but then I was like, damn it." That's but I knew it was a lot stronger than that. But I had to restrain myself, but I tried to also to keep a forceful voice.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because one of the things is that well, there's a joke I saw the other day. It was how many interpreters does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
None, because we're not allowed to add anything, we're not allowed to remove anything, and we're not allowed to change anything. So,
That
so there you go. So I always follow that rule, you know. So the gentleman who was at the conference for the LGBT community, that it was not his role. His role was not to remove anything from the content of the meeting. So, and same thing with swearing. You can change the tone of what you're saying without actually saying the swear words. But I mean, if you have to, you have to. But as long as you're not adding or removing or changing anything in the content.
Yeah, does it happen to you sometimes that you sort of say something that you would consider outrageous, and then you're like, did that person really say that? And then you're saying to yourself, did I really say that? And then a couple of like 20 seconds later, oh yeah, th- they're repeating it. They
Yeah.
really said that. And sometimes, like sometimes not as much anymore, but it used to sometimes take me off a bit off balance, and sometimes it's certain touchy topics, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope I'm not going to get blamed for having said something terrible. And
Hmm.
then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, that's what they said. Okay, all right. I guess I
Yeah.
said something terrible today.
And that's exactly what it is. As long as they're the ones saying something terrible and you're repeating the terrible message as faithfully as possible,
But
and
I
then
find it
maybe
somewhat so
after,
tiring.
it's tiring and it's difficult. It's hard to say things that are against your core values and your beliefs, but you kind of have to. And then if you don't like it, my suggestion is after your conference is done, go back to your hotel room and wash your mouth off with a bar of soap.
Listerine.
That's
We're
right.
sponsored by Listerine this week.
That's right. Listerine and yeah, minty chewing gum, like
Yeah.
dentine ice.
Yeah. Actually, I realized that actually because we were talking about mental fatigue, and this comes back to it. I mean, one of the hardest things, I say a lot of stupid things all day, and the hard thing about our job is to sometimes say other people's stupid things.
Hmm.
Because when you're saying something, it comes from you. You rarely like lying has a mental toll. Most of us don't lie or don't like to lie. I would hope.
Hmm.
And then this is sort of in between. You're saying something that you don't believe or that you think is not true, but at the same time, it is not a lie because you're using somebody else's word and ideas. But I wonder how the brain sees this. And I think that that's one of the reasons sometimes after a long day, we might feel really tired at some conferences because we basically spend a lot of time saying things that we don't believe in. And this is not a natural thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that does take a toll on you, and I think that's one of the good things that we'll explore next week too, because AI doesn't care, it doesn't have any feelings. Like it'll interpret whatever the person says, and there's no second thought about it. At the same time, coming back to our brains, at least we have the ability to be able to predict what's going to be said, and so our job is just to do it properly. So, and we have that ability to be able to have the humor, have the double entendres, have like the cultural nuances to be able to do that. So that's kind of something that the brain works on behind the scenes to be able to deliver the message. So it's yes, it's tiring to say things that we don't believe in, but at the same time, it's important to put yourself in a mind frame where you're rewarding yourself for saying the right thing too, because being able to take put aside your own personal beliefs to be able to do a good job is the most important thing as an interpreter. Like I think I said it in one of the other podcasts, is that we're kind of like Switzerland, right? We're
Yeah.
neutral. We're not allowed to give our position or anything like that. So
Well,
it.
I see it as being an actor sometimes. I
Mhm,
say to myself, like, I mean, like everyone, I have my own beliefs and my own values, and I keep them to myself and not anyone's business, especially when I'm interpreting. But to cope with that and to make it easier, sometimes I say to myself, I am an actor.
mhm.
So, and as I'm taking a role, and I can understand that some actors sometimes feel that their job is quite difficult because they have to be a character that is completely different than from themselves. But I try to see it that way. I try to see it as, okay, you know what? I am not that person making the speech, but maybe I am for a few minutes just to make sure that I'm in character. And actually, that's a little trick that helps me as well.
Yeah, that's a great trick because I mean, fine. A lot of actors, they can pick their roles too. We're not necessarily as uh, well in place to be able to pick who's going to be speaking and who we're going to be interpreting. But at the same time, you're right. Yeah, like we can put ourselves in the position of someone else, and if we do a good job at it, then yeah, we're going to be rehired. We're going to get a name for ourselves, and we're going to get a good reputation in the business. And I think that's the most important thing, more so than our own personal feelings about people or ideas or beliefs.
That's right. So, all right. So I think that we've been around now. Any last thoughts you'd like to add before we wrap up for this week?
Yeah, one last thing is, like, we talked about the speed of the speech and how fast people speak and how that really makes you tired. But I'd say, as a word of advice, the other thing applies too, where people are speaking so slowly and trying to make things interesting for a crowd, and it just doesn't work because this is the same thing that you hear over and over. It's like all the words are all blending into one. And I mean, it's much worse than what I just described, but and much the topics are sometimes a little bit more boring than interpretation, believe it or not. But yeah, that's the other thing that I would say is don't. There's a happy medium between both that will make everybody's brain not hurt.
Yeah, actually, to be honest with you, sometimes I'm wondering if a fast speaker or a slow speaker is the hardest one. And I think that the slow speaker are even harder because sometimes you can't, they're so slow you can't even predict what they're going to say because
Yeah,
they themselves don't really know what they're going to say.
yeah, absolutely.
And
So
and so if someone speaks fast, then you can maybe with over time pick it up and run. But if somebody is slow, oh my God, it's like doing Tai Chi and
watching paint dry.
yeah.
Anyways, yeah, that would be the last thing I would say about that. But yeah, this was an awesome podcast again, and stay tuned for next one because we're going to be delving into the AI, like we've alluded to a couple of times. And so, like I said, this is a two-part series. The part one is the human brain, and delving into the different multiple brain functions that we have in order to be able to do our job. But the next one will be how AI is going to help our brains do a better job. So stay tuned for next week. And until then, thank you so much, Alain, for the technical production aspect of these
Oh,
podcasts.
yeah, yeah. Well, my pleasure. I'm still working on it. Every week it's getting a little bit better.
Yeah, and when Listerine comes through with this with sponsoring this episode, then yeah, well,
Don't fact
well,
check this.
no, let's not fact check that. Anyways, thanks, Alain. It
All
was
right, my
great to see
friend.
you again, and yeah, we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week. Bye, everyone.
All right, take care.